At the beginning of this year, I decided to challenge myself. You see, every year I find a lot of new releases that I want to listen to that I put to the side for various reasons. That means I missed the boat on a lot of really good stuff. I wanted to change that this year. I wanted to get to as much new stuff as I possibly could, so I did. As I went through these releases, I wrote a lot of notes and I put them all on this big tier list. Of course, that tier list is what we're going to go through today. A few things to note, I couldn't go through every album released this year. There are some absolutely huge albums that just didn't make this list. Sorry about that, I just can't feasibly hear every single album. Second, this is not a scientific, objective listing of what is the best. In fact, if you catch me on a different day, you might see me change this list a bit. They aren't ranked by, oh, this album has this and this one doesn't. It's just what I enjoyed the most. At the end of the day, it's all subjective, so don't get mad at me if your favorite album is in the worst tier. One more thing, at the very end of this is some viewer-submitted albums. Without further ado, let's talk about every single thing I heard this year. Can you guess what the worst thing released this year was? If you guessed Tramp Stamps, then you're correct, and I'm sorry that you heard this album. Well, it's an EP, but still, whatever. I'll preface my thoughts on this EP by saying I went into it for the music. I did not go into it as part of, the drama, crowd. I don't really care about drama here. All I wanted to see was if the EP was actually as bad as people were saying it was, because I think the internet has a tendency to overreact about stuff like this. Yet in this case, I genuinely feel like the title of, worst album ever is deserved. This EP was painful, man. This is like Guantanamo Bay torture device type music. I think it's illegal to play this in public spaces, I think it's a public threat or something. Okay, I'm done joking, but yeah, this was just really bad. I mean, I genuinely have a hard time thinking of, artists that have put something as bad as this out. It feels like every single thing that could have went wrong here. It's just an absolute disaster. The instrumentation on this album is just the most generic sounding thing I've ever heard. It sounds like Nickelodeon or Disney Channel, their take on what pop punk or punk would be. It's always corporate sounding, it's never interesting, and somehow this is the best element of the album. The vocals are just god-awful. Some of these takes sound like first takes. Like on the song Best Forever, I'll get to the songs at a later point, but on this song, Best Forever, the lead singer, who I believe is named Marissa, tries to hit lower notes, but it's clear that they're out of her range, so she's hitting notes but they're off, and it's just baffling that it ever made the record. It feels like something that could have been fixed with auto-tune, but that brings me to a whole separate issue, because the auto-tuning on this album is some of the worst I've ever heard, unironically. It just sounds disgusting. I'm not one to usually argue about auto-tune. I personally don't mind it, and I think there are people who have used it in interesting ways, like 100 gecs, for example, but this album, oh my god. Listen to the auto-tune on Anger Issues, especially at the ending chorus. Oh my god. It's just so annoying. It is so grating. It's probably one of the reasons that every 2 songs on this EP, I took a break. Yeah, unironically, I had to take breaks listening to this album. It was genuinely, painful for me. The songwriting on this album, too, is just really bad, and it has no sense of irony or any awareness of what it is. It sounds like what 80s, suburban families thought punk was. Stuff like, I drank, I'm doing drugs, we're having sex, and I'm vomiting in the alley, and, I'm so cool. that's a lot of the ethos of this album. If I'm not mistaken, that's basically what the song Puke and Rally is. It feels so ingenuine and corporate. It doesn't feel right. It just doesn't work. Also, I kinda just noticed this as I'm going over some of these songs again. They really kinda like to rhyme a word with the exact same word. Like, anger issues rhymes issues with issues. Best forever also has, like, takeout with out. I mean, really? Then there's lines like, the absolutely amazing, just a Tumblr girl and a skater boy taking on the world stuck in Illinois, which is said, like, without awareness. I think that's a big thing of it. It does not realize how silly it sounds. The EP tries to sound all tough and, powerful, but in the end it sounds like a parody of pop punk and Disney Channel music, It does not convey the emotions they want it to. The EP should have never been released in this state. I genuinely don't know why it was. It's like, just basically opening yourself up to jokes. It is... I don't know how this happened. Okay, so moving on, we have a cult favorite band. This is one of the internet's favorites, Weezer. OK Human and Van Weezer. I don't like Weezer, really. I like a few of their albums. I like Blue, I like Pinkerton, I like Everything Will Be Alright at the End, I like Green. Those are the four that I would actually listen to, and even then, they're kind of just like 7 out of 10s. I think you really have to find Rivers Cuomo charming to like Weezer, and I don't. I really don't like his style. OK Human and Van Weezer did show a bit of promise, though. It was clear that they were going to try something different musically. Van Weezer's going a bit into hard rock and metal. OK Human's kind of digging into a bit of orchestral, Baroque pop kind of influences. But I feel like neither of these albums do anything with that sound. If anything, they're just Weezer albums with a different set of sounds over them. It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing kind of thing. Some of these songs are just god-awful too, like Blue Dream. Like, Blue Dream stands out as one of the worst things I've heard this year. It's basically Rivers Cuomo saying dad jokes over Crazy Train by Ozzy Osbourne. It is baffling to me. It genuinely caught me by surprise, but not in a good way. I don't know. I don't like Weezer, so maybe it's just, my bias against Weezer, saying like, oh, this is one of the worst things I heard this year. But yeah, these were just really not that good. The world's favorite Led Zeppelin tribute act is back, and this wasn't good. Okay, I know the Led Zeppelin joke is like old, but let me explain a bit. After the few EPs they had released or whatever, it was clear that they didn't want to continue being labeled as the Zeppelin band. They wanted to abandon that, classification, basically. And I was kind of excited for that because you don't know what they could have done. They could have went into a number of different influences and pulled from so much and could have made something really interesting. Yet the Battle at Garden's Gate still feels like a 70s rock album through and through. Maybe it's not as Zeppelin-y as some of their other stuff, but it's still there. At the end of the day, this is still exactly what I thought I would hear from a new Greta Van Fleet album. I don't think they're trying to back down on that sound, but it certainly comes off that way. This is still just another 70s tribute. In some ways, though, it's a step down from what they were already doing, though. The songs here strike me as just not as notable, and the vocals to me are just... You know how people really hate Geddy Lee's voice for being so high up and shrill and, just kind of annoying? I never really understood that, but then I heard this album and I feel like I'm one of those people. I'll just be brutally honest, they need to step away from the 70s sound in some way. They can keep parts of it, but they really need to experiment more. If this is what we consider their big leap forward, it's proven absolutely nothing. At this rate, they're always going to be labeled as the band that sounds like Led Zeppelin, and I don't want that to be the case, but albums like this only, perpetuate that idea. This is Sufjan Stevens and Angelo De Augustine's A Beginner's Mind. I found it absolutely boring, and I know that's a controversial opinion. While I haven't heard any of Angelo De Augustine's music, I have heard Sufjan's, and while I do like some of it, he's an artist that I respect more than anything. Most of his music just bores me to death, and while I can see why people like it, I do think he is a really good songwriter. It's just not something I listen to. A Beginner's Mind has the same issue, it just puts me to sleep. There's not much more I can really say about it, it's all just my personal preference there. Like, I can tell this is a structurally good album, but the experience of hearing this one was just so not my thing. I think overall this is probably the most competent of my least favorite category, but it's also one that was just excruciating to go through. I almost feel like I shouldn't include this one because it's basically a joke, but yeah, I didn't really like this one. This is the Foo Fighters, or as they're known on this album, the DGs, with Hail Satin. The whole gimmick here is that it's the Foo Fighters covering the Bee Gees, and the joke gets old very, very quickly, like after the first song quickly. And when it's not Bee Gees songs, it's stuff from Medicine at Midnight, but specifically live versions of that stuff, and none of it's remarkable. I'm sure they had a lot of fun making this album. Dave Grohl certainly seems like the guy who would absolutely get a kick out of this, but really, as a listening experience, this wasn't a lot of fun. Again, I feel like I shouldn't include it. I'm probably taking it way too seriously, but yeah, I didn't really like it. Now we get to talk about Logic, or on this album he's known as Dr. Destruction, and the album is Planetary Destruction. I kind of butchered that, but whatever. I only listened to this one as a bit of a joke. It's, was anybody really expecting anything extraordinary from a Logic MF Doom album? Better yet, a Logic MF Doom and Rick and Morty type album? This is some of the most unfunny, uninteresting music I've heard in a long, long time. This was absolutely soul-sucking. It's also just really cringeworthy as well. There's a good amount of moments on here that are they just get me to groan, especially at the end when, it's like the whole plot of this album is wrapping up and they have to, bring in other franchises. Like, they have to bring in Hitchhiker's Guide and they have to bring in Cowboy Bebop, and it's all part of this big plot, and it's just so just cringy. I think the beats are fine here, but if that's the best you have to offer, there's really something wrong. I know I've seen some people, say that, oh, it's just a fun album to, put on the back. It's not a masterpiece or anything, but it's, a good time. I feel like we listened to two different albums. Maybe if you think Rick and Morty is the height of comedy and you don't mind Logic, you'll get something out of this. But as someone who doesn't like either of those, this really did nothing for me. Even as a joke onto myself, it wasn't funny or entertaining. Oh, and before I forget, this is kind of a tribute to MF Doom, but it's more of a tribute to Adult Swim than anything. The fact MF Doom is an inspiration to this album doesn't really play into anything. It's not like the beats here are styled after old MF Doom beats, or, his flow is, kind of mimicking MF Doom. It's just, I don't know, it's just the iconography of MF Doom. So yeah, overall this was really not worth my time, even as a joke. We continue forth with Donda. Am I gonna get killed for this ranking? I don't know. In my opinion, Donda is an absolutely flawed album. It is way too long, it is way too boring and tedious sounding. It has some really bad tracks on it. I wouldn't call it a disaster or anything. I think there are good elements to it, but overall, this is one of the least enjoyable things I heard this year. Maybe the biggest point to me is that it's very hard for Kanye to justify a 108-minute runtime on this album, especially with songs this just simple. To me, Donda is a very minimalist album, and sometimes that works, like on No Child Left Behind, which may be my favorite Kanye song ever. I really do love how just, heavenly it sounds. But as a whole, a lot of the minimalism creates this sort of sense that I heard this before, by the time you're getting 25 minutes in or 30 minutes in, it starts to become kind of grating because you kind of feel like there is nothing else the album has to present. Overall, the sound is empty and unfinished, and certainly not commanding of my attention for its runtime. There are moments on here that are genuinely bad though, like Jail 2, which features Marilyn Manson and DaBaby. I could basically end my thoughts on that song by saying he included DaBaby and Marilyn Manson on a song, but it goes a bit deeper than that because I view it as just controversy for controversy's sake and giving, these two highly criticized people a platform when they shouldn't be given one. But there's also songs on here that just strike me as, I don't know, lazy, I guess? Remote Control sounds like it was made in a day. The lyrics are laughably bad. Kanye's performance sounds phoned in, like he doesn't want to be there. The best part of this song is the ending with the glub go gab glab, but even that sounds absolutely terrible and horribly filtered. I can go on and on about how much I didn't enjoy Donda, but I do think there are good things that need to be pointed out. For as much as a meme as it is, I do think Donda Chant is a really cool opener. It's certainly striking. The opening of the song Moon is absolutely perfect. God Breathed and Off the Grid are definitely earworms that have, basically been in the back of my mind since I heard them. Off the Grid has Cardi on it too, and in the background he's going like, wah! I love it. I really do love him. So in short, there are things I like about Donda, but overall it's way too flawed. I think this is an album that absolutely needed more time in the oven, and it did not need to be even longer with the deluxe version. No way. You actually put a Pink Floyd album in your worst tier? Aren't they your favorite band? This has to be a joke, right? You can't be putting them here, right? I hate to say it, but I'm dead serious. The Momentary Lapse remix is at the lowest tier. For the last 2 years, Pink Floyd have really been milking the later years box set, which is a release that just kinda compiled stuff from Momentary Lapse through the Division Bell. They've basically been taking stuff from that box set and releasing it on its own, and this one doesn't really surprise me. A Momentary Lapse of Reason's original mix really isn't liked by people. It's way too cheesy and way too 80s. Of course, a new remix from the band that makes it less 80s sounding was going to be prioritized. However, I think the remix is actually worse than the original, and it was sold in a really scummy way. While there are moments on here that sound good, like Signs of Life, a lot of it just does not work. One Slip sounds absolutely gutted. There's literally nothing to it anymore. It almost sounds like a demo. Maybe demo is a bit too far, but it really doesn't feel as big as it once was. Terminal Frost sounds genuinely unbalanced with guitars that just aren't as audible as they should be. The same issue reappears on Sorrow, which is really confusing because that's a guitar-driven track. On the Turning Away has bass that's way too loud. What did we get, Giles Martin on this mix? It's weird for me to talk about this album because I'm defending the original at this point. The original Momentary Lapse of Reason is an album that I think is one of their weaker ones, and it's kinda because of the sound of that album. It's so 80s. It's an album that could have only been made in the time frame that it was made in. While I think it's really tempting to try and remix an album that is so dated, it kinda opens my eyes up to something. A Momentary Lapse of Reason's sound is absolutely fundamental to that album. The whole thing was made with a certain approach to music, and now that that stuff is basically reduced, it just doesn't feel right. This paired with an already kind of bad mix is a recipe for disaster in my opinion. I think it's also worth noting how they sold this album specifically on vinyl. It spans over 2 discs, and the reason they give for that is because of sound quality. You can play it at 45 RPM. I'm not going to get into the whole science of that, but yeah, it's true, but in this case, I'm really not buying it. Considering Momentary Lapse is already a 1-disc thing, you'd think it would just be on 1 disc. It doesn't sound bad on that format at all. Yet, for the reason of sound quality, it's on 2 discs, meaning you're going to actually spend double the amount you would on a regular copy. I genuinely do not believe they put it on 45 RPM for the sole purpose of sound quality. I genuinely believe it was done for money. It's so they can get $45 out of you instead of getting 30 or 25. Considering the band are absolutely milking every little thing on this box set, I have no reason to believe they did this in good faith. And don't even get me started on the 360-degree mix of this remix. It's honest to God worse. It is so flat, and to me, it's really unlistenable. To me, this is a really sad release from a band I undeniably love. I mean, partially why it's so high up is because I really do love this band, and I love some of these songs. However, as a genuinely diehard fan of this band, as someone who would go across the country to see the Pink Floyd exhibit, this is hard to justify. I've really tried to be optimistic about all of this, but no, all I see is dollar signs. And with that out of the way, we can move on to our next category, which was stuff that, was alright. The Foo Fighters appear once again on this list with Medicine at Midnight, and I don't really know what to think about this one. The big thing to say about it is that this is the most commercial, kind of generic sounding release I've ever heard from them. Concrete and Gold was definitely a turn towards this safe sound, and some would argue Sonic Highways started it, though I actually think that album deserves a bit of reappraisal. But yeah, this is really something that I just find kind of predictable. In some ways, this is their father of all moment. They're trying to make a party record to varying results, and look, as tempting as that comparison is, I don't think it's fair. While I do think this album is their worst, I don't think it's on father of all levels of just annoyance, It's not that bad. There's a few moments on here that I had a bit of fun with, but overall, a lot of it was just in through one ear and out the other. Some of it really just is car commercial music, like unironically, this was actually car music. Some of it is, reminiscent of like those kind of like, like ads from Amazon where it's like, we're working together with our, workers to provide a safe future for them, even though they're making them, work in the worst conditions possible. I do have to point out the song Shame Shame, which just doesn't even fit on an album like this. I don't think it would fit on any Foo Fighters album. It is so just odd. It's not in a good way either. It's just, why is this here? I think the best way to just demonstrate it is just to tell you my story of hearing this song live. I saw the Foo Fighters this year for the first time, and I really thought it was a fun show. I think they're definitely some of the best live performers. But they got to that song, they got to Shame Shame, and it just crushed the momentum of the show. Nobody was interested in it. It's too slow, it's too tedious, it's not a song that fits a live atmosphere like that. I mean, especially in a set where, other songs include All My Life and This Is a Call, these songs that just go so hard. Medicine at Midnight was just safe and predictable and commercial, and I don't really think highly of it in any real way, but it could be a lot worse. One more thing, can we just stop making party records like this? I know times are hard and we just need entertainment, but please, for the love of God, make something substantial. Make something that people will be listening to for decades. This one came out and everybody forgot about it instantly. It's the Gorillaz Meanwhile EP. I'll just be real with you, I'm kinda getting burnt out on Gorillaz as a whole. I do think they're putting out good music right now, but I feel like they've lost a lot of the character that made this band so interesting. This EP is definitely focused more on dancehall and dub, which I think is cool, considering this is kinda where they started from, but I don't think it's too captivating. The performances here are good, the songs here are good, but I genuinely forgot about this release ever existing. That's genuinely all I can say about it. This is another album where I really don't have much to say. It's Czarface's Super What. It's another album that's competent, but just doesn't have the staying power. At least it's nice to hear Doom again. The Beatles have had quite a year, huh? Get Back, everybody was talking about it, I still haven't seen it though. And there was this, the Let It Be Deluxe Edition box set, whatever they call it. I feel like I need to state my opinion on Let It Be before I can even talk about this album. I absolutely love Let It Be, I think it's one of their best. But I'm also someone who believes that the Phil Spector mix of this album is the absolute best version of it. I know that's a bit of a controversial opinion, I know a lot of people hate the orchestral additions to songs like, The Long and Winding Road. I think they're great. I know people will absolutely swear by Let It Be Naked as like the definitive version, but I just can't get into it no matter how many times I've heard it. This release caught my eye because, first off, it's a Beatles release, second off, it's a Let It Be release, and third of all, because there's a remix on here by Giles Martin. This is his fourth Beatles remix, I think, at this point. He did Sgt. Pepper, he did White Album, he did Abbey Road, and now he's doing this. I think the rest have sounded really good. Like, I know I mentioned this in the Tempest in a Teapot video, but I prefer his version of Sgt. Pepper over the original, which is kinda crazy to say. So I was excited for this release, but I think there's a few drawbacks to it that keep it from being something I actually like. The biggest issue to me is the remix. I do not think it sounds good. There's way too much low end on this thing, and it absolutely, washes over a lot of elements in different songs. I Me Mine and Dig a Pony stand out to me as two really horrific incidents, but why is there even that much based on something like Two of Us, which is a gentle acoustic ballad? But even the bonuses on this thing don't strike me as anything too great. The Glenn Johns mix is here, I think that's really cool, but why isn't there something like the Rooftop Concert? But even outside of that, I don't think they're providing too much that's, really too interesting. There's not many thrills in this, and the remix is just kinda bassy. I guess for now, the Phil Spector mix will stay as my favorite, which sucks because it was made by Phil Spector. Pink Floyd shows up yet again with another release that was originally from the later years. Luckily enough though, this one wasn't as bad. What I will say though is that this is something that really wasn't necessary. Was anybody really asking for the Nebworth show? Overall it's fine, it's not really a standout moment for anybody though. I don't think there's anybody who says the Nebworth show is their absolute favorite. I think this one works good as a bonus in the box set, but on its own it just doesn't really stand in the way that it should. Also, before someone comments that, yes, this is on 2 vinyl as well, although the show is long enough that it couldn't be put on 1 vinyl anyway. I do think that paying $40 for 7 songs is a bit of a ripoff though. I don't know, was anybody really excited about this release? 2 categories down, 2 to go. Now we're getting into the actually good stuff. Look at that cover. Isn't that just art? This is Zach Fox's Shut the F*** Up Talking to Me. Sadly, I don't have too much to say about this one. I thought it was good, but I don't think it was really anything more than just a fun album to hear. There's some good performances on this. There's some absolutely standout lines like could get ugly as f*** like Ed Sheeran. Absolutely amazing. But like I said, I don't think it's anything more than just a fun album to hear a few times. I don't know. I haven't really returned to it all that much since I first heard it. This is the debut self-titled album of Cavs, or Michael Kavanagh, who you may know as the drummer for King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. I think this was a really cool album. It's a lot of fun to see how he can put together these sonic journeys using just drums and percussion. I don't think everybody will get into this record because of its limitations. It isn't a melodic album really, it's just a very rhythmic one, of course. However, I do find it a bit sad that I heard basically nobody say anything about this album this year. It's really kind of a hidden gem. If you're a big King Gizzard fan, or if you're just someone who really likes drums, I'd say to go check this one out. Steven Wilson is an artist that I personally haven't gotten into too much, and maybe that's because I kinda find that a lot of modern progressive rock is boring. I did like this album though, and maybe that's because it is such a stylistic shift for him. It's certainly more pop-oriented, and I could see that being an issue for progressive rock fans who just want to hear progressive rock, but I find it endearing. The sound of this album is so modern and clean, at times it really does remind me of David Bowie as well. Conceptually, it definitely is a critique of these times, though I don't think it gets too bleak. But I do think the album does beat you over the head with the message sometimes, like on Personal Shopper. I don't think that's the biggest issue in the world though, and I did find myself really enjoying this one. Yeah, the Deltarune Chapter 2 soundtrack by Toby Fox is actually making this list. I'm kinda convinced he can't write a bad song. He always seems to capture the mood of a scene perfectly through his music, while also retaining the character that makes his music so distinctive. He's definitely one of the most unique gaming composers right now, and it's always entertaining to see what he's cooked up. While this soundtrack isn't my favorite thing he's ever done, I still think it's really good. What can I say? The Spamton theme goes hard. I feel like this placement's going to be a bit controversial, but I really did like this one. I think Call Me If You Get Lost has some of Tyler's strongest material. I really love Hot Wind Blows, Manifesto, and Juggernaut. But to be fair, I don't think there is a bad moment on this album, just more moments that I don't really care for. There's a few songs that I'm not really into, like Rise, Safari, and Run It Up, and there's a few that I think are just a bit too long, like Wilshire and Sweet / I Thought You Wanted to Dance. I don't think these tracks destroy my enjoyment of the album. I think they just hold it back from being, a top-tier album. I will say though that this is most definitely a very, very special release. It really does feel like the culmination of a lot of what Tyler has been doing his entire career. This, paired with Tyler's ability to create concepts and characters, really makes this album, I don't know, just essential for this year. I feel like if we're going to talk about this year's music, you have to talk about this one. It may not be my favorite thing in the whole wide world, but I do recommend it to anybody who hasn't heard it already. I thought I was going to be all negative and cynical about Pink Floyd this year, but they actually surprised me a bit. In an effort to keep some copyrights around, they released 12 different bootlegs to streaming services. They span from 1970 to 1972, and while they aren't anything new if you're a diehard Pink Floyd fan like myself, you've probably already heard these, they are pretty cool. My personal favorites are Tokyo 72, Copenhagen 71, and San Diego 71, but I think they're all pretty good. The worst part is the sound quality, but you should be expecting this out of a 70s bootleg. It's nice to see the band acknowledge these unofficial bootlegs, and it's really, really cool to me that people are now allowed to hear them. Well, officially, of course. Hearing the Golden Casket was a bit of a refreshing experience. Modest Mouse doesn't release a lot these days, and it's always kind of an event for me when they do. For the last few years, they've been tapping into this sort of psychedelic sound, but it never really panned out to be a full album until now. While I don't think the end product is super consistent, I think there's moments on here that really do stand out as some of my favorites from them recently. We Are Between is one of my songs of the summer basically. It's super catchy, super upbeat, and just a lot of fun to hear. Wooden Soldiers has certainly grown on me as time's gone by. Back to the Middle may be one of my favorite Modest Mouse songs, period. It's a perfect closer. Don't go into this one expecting a Lonesome Crowded West or Moon in Antarctica. It's just not that type of album. It's by no means a masterpiece, but it was nice to hear, and I'm glad Modest Mouse is back. Hopefully they don't take another 5 years to make another album. Frank Zappa may be the hardest person to talk about in the entire history of music. I mean, I've been trying to write Frank Zappa essays for years now, and I just can't. There's no way to describe who he is. At least in a way that's concise and easy to understand. Luckily though, the Zappa documentary done by Alex Winter does a pretty good job at that. There's a few things I wish it explored more, but in the end, I think it's a pretty definitive documentary. But in a bit of a strange turn, I think the soundtrack actually does a bit of a better job. There's some stuff on here that I'm genuinely happy made the cut. The whole thing isn't just studio tracks, it's live stuff, interviews, songs he's produced, early influences. Each of these tracks come together and really paint a picture of Zappa that you can't really get otherwise. While I think the movie explains the man behind the music, I think this album basically just describes his music. I think there are some notable exclusions, but it's pretty, it's pretty concise. The one thing I'm not really into is the original score for this movie, and it's not bad though. I'll make that clear. It's not a bad score. It's just I don't really listen to movie scores, so it really isn't my thing. I'll go over this one very quickly. This is a compilation release that combines Kid A and Amnesiac. It also contains some really nice bonus content, though I wish there was a bit more. Besides that though, I think it's a pretty good package, and the bonus content here is worth hearing. I talked about this one on stream a while back, and I think I didn't really describe it in a good way, and I think I sounded too negative, even though I gave it a 7. Here's the thing about LW. I think this is by far their least interesting microtonal album. Flying Microtonal Banana felt like a breath of fresh air, It was something so just different and new. I feel like that's an album we'll be talking about for decades. KG saw them branch out a bit with things like Microtonal Metal on The Hungry Wolf of Fate and whatever Intrasport is. I don't really know what it is, but it's absolutely amazing. LW, on the other hand, really doesn't feel like anything new, and that's not because it's a sequel to KG, it's more because I don't think they really pushed themselves to try out new ideas. The microtonal albums are in this series called Explorations into Microtonal Tuning, and this doesn't feel like an exploration as much as it feels like a retread. LW really does feel like another KG, but even then it feels like a less daring KG. I will say though that I think this is a better batch of songs than KG. KGLW beats out The Hungry Wolf of Fate, One Night Everywhere beats out Automation, Supreme Ascendancy beats out Straws in the Wind. I think you get what I'm saying. This is a much more consistent album to me. I'll also say that the performances on here are good, though I think they lack the sort of charisma and energy that other albums have. It almost feels like this album is supposed to go a bit harder than it actually does. I don't really know how to explain it. KG has the exact same problem, and to me, it just kind of makes this vibe that I just don't really care for. While I have my gripes with LW, I do think it is a good album at the end of the day. I just think that King Gizzard is at their absolute best when they're challenging themselves in some new way, or they're truly pushing themselves to do something that, you know, it doesn't feel like anybody else has done. I think that LW is more of a crowd pleaser for microtonal fans than anything. LW is good, I just don't think it's a standout moment for them. Speaking of King Gizzard and their microtonal output, here's two bootlegger releases that came out this year, Live in Melbourne and Live in Sydney 21. I could have given these separate placements on this list, but really I have the same thing to say about both of them, so, you know, they're all together. I thought both of these were pretty good, you know, not my favorites definitely, but definitely really nice companion pieces to Flying Microtonal, KG, and LW. First off, the thing that stands out to me the most is some of the deeper tracks here. Melting, D-Day, and The Book are here. These are songs that the band has only played a handful of times in varying levels of quality, and now we have actual, like, good versions of those songs. You know, in a live setting, of course. There's also a few overhauls, like D-Day actually gets a bit of a more energetic version here, but Open Water actually has a whole new drum part to it. The second big thing I have to say is that I think the KG and LW songs that appear on these sets are really, really good live. Like, a lot better than they are on these studio albums. Ontology was already a banger, but now it is a genuine monster of a song with its ending. I would love to see that version live, it is incredible. KGLW and especially Hungry Wolf of Fate are, you know, just so much more powerful and impactful live. These are heavy, heavy versions of those songs. Honey is paired up with Sleep Drifter from Flying Microtonal Banana, and it really, really does work. If I'm not mistaken, Honey actually came out of a Sleep Drifter jam, so, you know, it makes sense. Honestly, I can't think of a KGLW song here that just doesn't work live better than it does on the studio. Maybe Some of Us, but I'm not too sure. I don't really remember how Some of Us transitioned into a live setting. I definitely enjoyed these more than KG and LW, and yeah, I don't really know what else to say. These were good. Sketches of Brunswick East fans finally get some recognition. I quite honestly didn't expect to rank this one this high. I mean, I knew I would kinda like it, but I didn't expect it to be the very top of this category. For the non-Zappa fanatics in the audience, 1988 was the last time he ever toured. This release, as the title says, is the last US show. The 88 tour is filled with drama, you know, behind-the-scenes stuff regarding how stuff was played and things like that, but honestly, to me, this is one of my favorite Zappa bands. This is a really great lineup, and I'm not just talking about, you know, Ike Willis, Mike Keanally, Scott Tunez. I'm talking about every single person, you know, here. This band makes all of these songs just sound huge. There really is a sense of scale to it. I also really like the set on this one. It really does pull from a lot of different eras of Zappa's career, and, you know, even has some stuff that he was, you know, playing in 88 and debuting in 88. It probably won't do anything to, you know, get non-Zappa fans into Zappa. I'm sure there's people who are looking at this like, this beat Call Me If You Get Lost? Are you serious? But, it's my list, and, I enjoyed this one more than I liked Tyler's, you know, output this year, so I don't know. This was a really good show, and I'm glad it got an official release. Okay, it's time for the moment you've all been waiting for, you know. This is the big, big moment. Let me stress that some of these are basically tied. I really had a hard time putting these in order of, you know, what I think were the best. I think the top few were, you know, basically cemented, you know, as soon as I heard them, but yeah, these were just kinda hard, and I feel like I can flip-flop on these at any given moment. Alright, you waited long enough, here it is. The best of the best. I'll be real with you, the Turning Wheel is an album I thought I wasn't going to really like. Upon hearing Little Deer, I thought I had gotten myself into a territory that I just wasn't going to be into. You know, it was just too, I don't know, just too whimsical, I guess. It's a very airy, floaty type of album, and that stuff just doesn't interest me usually, but as it went on, I really did see the power of this one. My god, is The Turning Wheel a beautiful sounding album. The production on this is squeaky clean, and it feels like nothing is ever muddy in any sort of way, but that means nothing if the songs weren't good. Luckily enough, each song here is phenomenal. There's always a hook or an instrumental that's just so lovely that it kind of burrows in the back of your mind. Speaking of the instrumentals, they're super well put together. It's so lush and grand and theatric. It's really, really cool. And the vocals on display here are just kind of the cherry on top of the whole package. I don't think this will be something for everyone. Like I said, I didn't even think I was gonna like this one, but in the end, it really won me over. You'd think I'd have a lot to say about an album that is this high on the list, and I don't, but don't take that as, you know, a critique against the album. The thing about Zapper is it's consistently good, and it's consistently, you know, energetic and just entertaining. I really found this one to be addictive too. Like, I came back to this one when I needed some sort of dopamine rush, you know? Every single aspect of this release comes together and creates this whole that just gets my brain going. Oh, also, the cover on this one is one of my favorites from this year. It really, really does capture the vibe. By the Time I Get to Phoenix really feels like an album that we're going to view as highly influential in the coming years. The album pulls influence from a number of dark and depressing things, but in the end it creates a very, very emotional album that really you can just feel at the bottom of your stomach. The sound of this album is just so experimental and so different. The instrumentals throughout are genuinely hard to comprehend at times, to a point where I'm guessing, you know, what's going to be next? What's over the hill? And it never disappoints. This, paired with the thematic darkness of the album, really paints a just bleak picture. One that I think is really, really striking. By the Time I Get to Phoenix is an emotional album that's getting all the praise it deserves. Who knows what the future of Injury Reserve is, but whatever it is, it's really exciting, and, you know, like I said at the beginning, I think this is an album we'll be talking about for a long time. This was definitely one of the most essential albums of this year, and I'm glad I heard it. The new JPEG Mafia album, LP, is here, and it's by far the best thing I've ever heard him do. Don't take that as a diss against albums like Veteran or All My Heroes Are Cornballs. I just think this is his most consistent work yet. It always feels like there's one or two songs on his albums that I, you know, inevitably skip over, like Grimy Waifu on All My Heroes, but on this album it feels like everything is on an equal playing field. Outside of that, Peggy is still insanely creative, both production-wise and lyrically. The one thing this album doesn't have is the off-the-wall spontaneity of other albums, but I don't really think that's a bad thing at all. Even then, I do think there are enough curveballs on this one to kind of satisfy that hunger, like the piano break on Tired, Nervous, and Broke. It feels like on every single album, Peggy reinvents himself in some new way, and the LP is no different. This just happens to be my favorite phase of his. First heard about this one on a Danny Brown live stream, and I was instantly hooked. I mean, instantly. Bruiser Wolf's delivery and voice are so unique to him. Like he says on his own album, I got my own sound, I'm an instrument. Each line is its own sort of routine where there's a setup and a punchline, and it never really gets old. It's always really entertaining. Genuinely, there are so many good lines on this album that it would be impossible for me to pick a favorite. And like the lyrics, it's really hard to pick a favorite song here because every song is incredible. Honestly, talking about this album doesn't really do it justice. You kinda just have to hear it to get it. I loved every single second of Dope Game Stupid, and I think you can hear it in my voice. I really, really do like this one. Here's another bootleg from King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. It's Live in Milwaukee 19. I think out of all the 2019 shows I've heard officially released by the band, this is probably my favorite. This is a dream set list. Like, if you asked me, like, if I was given the choice to make a King Gizzard set list, it would look somewhat like this. Of course, this tour was for Fishing for Fishies and Infest the Rat's Nest, so you have a bit of both, but I absolutely love that Perihelion is here. It's one of my all-time favorites. You also have two little suites on this one. You have Wawa and Road Train from Nonagon Infinity, but you also have Inner Cell, Loyalty, and Horology from Polygon Dwanaland. And that's not even talking about the absolutely amazing version of Head on Pill that wraps up this entire show. It's also nice to see some oddball tunes get thrown in here, like Stressin' from Oddments and Murder of the Universe from Murder of the Universe. It's also a pretty well-recorded bootleg. It seems that the 2019 ones are kind of hit or miss. I don't have any issues with this one, though. I think they did a really fantastic job here. My only complaint is that there is a very weak horology at the end of the Inner Cell trilogy, but other than that, this is absolutely a fun time. Okay, last King Gizzard bootlegger project thing, this is Live at Levitation. The release combines two shows from 2014 and 2016, and it's absolutely incredible. Both shows are distorted, loud, energetic, and just really entertaining. The band is firing on all cylinders throughout these shows, and there's moments on here where it's honestly just peak King Gizzard. The version of Am I in Heaven from 2014 is sublime. It is incredibly... It's probably my favorite version of that song. I love it. There's also some incredible versions of Holy Ghost, Sleepwalker, and Cutthroat Boogie, and both Mind Fuzz medleys are just... I don't know what to say. As a huge King Gizzard fan, I just adored this whole release, and I would love to hear more recordings from this time frame get officially released. Sinner Get Ready really shook me to like my very core. There was something about this one that just... I don't know how to explain it. This is a beautifully crafted album while also being one of the most unnerving releases of this year. It's definitely the most unnerving thing I heard this year. Everything from Linguist vocals to the instrumentation to the themes of this album just really resonate in such a uniquely dark and just captivating way. I don't think I should explain this album. I think you should just go hear it. It is just kind of an experience that I think you should have. If you aren't hooked by the end of I Who Bend the Tall Grasses, I don't really know what to tell you. I know just saying to go listen to it is a bit of a cop-out, but I think out of every album that was released this year that I heard, this is the one that kind of defies description the most. Get a good pair of headphones, sit alone in a dark room, and listen to this absolute masterpiece. There were two UK bands that I really got excited with this year, and one I'll talk about later, but one I'll talk about now. It's Black Country New Road and their album For the First Time. While I think it's somewhat easy to compare this band to acts like Slint, I think they're their own thing, and what's here is some of my favorite music of, this decade and probably the last 20 years. This is incredible stuff. I can only describe this album as erratic. It goes from beautiful and serene to just the musical equivalent of anxiety. The band is also just tight and locked in together. They really are one powerful unit. Then there's the lyrics, which honestly kind of remind me of Captain Beefheart, though more accurately I think they remind me of Scott Walker, who is someone who's actually name-dropped on this album. There's so many great poetic moments on here, and this paired with Isaac Wood's amazing delivery of a lot of these lines just creates... I don't really know what it creates. It's just a perfect feeling. Listen to the song Science Fair on this one, you'll know what I'm saying. He's the perfect fit for these songs. For the First Time, an absolutely amazing debut release. If songs like Concord are anything to go by, their next album is going to be just as good. This is the last King Gizzard album on this list, I promise. And one that I just did not like at first. Like, seriously, when I first heard this, I had thought they had adventured too far out of their comfort zone to a point where they didn't really know what they were doing. I never felt that way about a King Gizzard album before. This was the first time that I felt they jumped the shark. But then I heard it again, and again, and again, and again, and again. I genuinely think this is a top 5 King Gizzard album for me now, behind Infest the Rat's Nest, Sketches of Brunswick East, and Paper Mache Dream Balloon. The sound of this album is so much more lighthearted and fun than anything they've ever really done. It truly is a vibrant sounding album. That's not to say it's all sunshine and rainbows. There's songs like Blue Morpho and Interior People, and even 202 Killer Year that have a darker edge to them, but they're not overpowering. It's not like this album has a Murder of the Universe or Infest the Rat's Nest edge to it. There just is something about it that's just so bright and cheery. I think that's what makes it stand out to me so much. It's just so bright. It's so fun, you know? Hearing this album is a breath of fresh air for a band that's talked about vomit coffins and vomit overtaking the universe and, you know, people leaving Earth to go to Mars, then burning on Mars, and then going to hell where they have to, you know, get revenge on the people who put them in such a situation. It's devoid of that. And look, I absolutely love those dark songs, but there is something to say about just enjoying yourself in some way, you know? While I don't think this album will please everyone, it just hit the right spot for me, you know? Sometimes there's just that album that just you kind of feel like you need. If you follow my Twitter, you might have saw the tweet that said that, you know, Cavalcade was probably going to be the album of the year. Guess what it is? The album of the year. Who would have guessed? God damn. Cavalcade is like an album that was made specifically for me. Like, I heard this while going to work one day, and I noticed my jaw dropping during the album. It was that, like, not groundbreaking, but it was that shock to the system that I felt I needed. I would describe Cavalcade in the same way I described For the First Time, you know, as erratic, but I think it's much more intense. In some ways, this is an exercise in maximalism. You hear a song like Slow, and it feels like a world-ending song. It feels like a comet coming towards Earth to wipe out all of humanity. The album is full of those extremes, but it also has extremes in the other direction where there's just genuinely beautiful songs. Marlene Dietrich is a great little ballad that follows up the absolutely chaotic John 50 that opens up this album. My favorite mellow moment is the song Ascending Forth, which you're hearing over this section right now. It's about 10 minutes long and starts with this peaceful little section, but as it goes on, it ascends to being something truly masterful and ascendant, really. Cavalcade has a push and pull to it, but it's never really ever grating or annoying. Maybe that's due to the songs being as good as they are. I know I mentioned Ascending Forth is the song of the year, basically, but really, any song on this one is a contender for that title. Both musically and lyrically, there doesn't seem to be a weak link here, and that's really, really good for a band that, you know, this is their second album. I could go on and on about how much I absolutely love this album, but you know, we don't have all day necessarily. This video does have to end, right? Cavalcade absolutely blew my mind, and it still blows my mind. I still feel as excited about it as I was when I first heard it. So yeah, Cavalcade is the album of the year, and I'm super, super excited about whatever Black Midi has in store for their next album. So, that was the year-end list, but we're not done yet because I have to go over some recommended albums. These were requested by some of you, and yeah, here they are. Ska Dream, under most circumstances, would be seen as a joke. I mean, this thing was even released on April Fool's Day, if I'm not mistaken. Yet, despite sounding like an elaborate prank, it's actually really good. The album is a reworking of Jeff Rosenstock's No Dream, which on its own is a good album, but the ska sound really does make it pop out. Quite honestly, I prefer this version of it over the original. Ska Dream is fun and entertaining, and while I don't think it's much more than just an exciting detour, it is something you should check out. Ranking this album is a bit hard for me, but I'd say right under Call Me If You Get Lost. Sour is the debut album from Olivia Rodrigo, and it's exactly what I thought it was going to be, and it's an album that I'll probably never ever listen to again, but it's not a bad album. As a whole, it's generic, boring, and forgettable, but there are moments on here where I think it shines, like some of the more pop-punk inspired tracks. I will say though that I didn't find it to be boring to a point of it being offensive. It was just competent and just something that I have no interest in returning to. Sour is not an atrocious album like a number of people have kinda made it out to be. It's certainly no masterpiece either. Sour does exactly what it sets out to do, and yeah, that's about it. This is like the most indifferent review I've ever given. If I had to place it somewhere, it would be right under Medicine at Midnight. I don't have too much insight to give on Crawler because I'm not an Idols fan. To me, their sound becomes repetitive and grating after the 10-minute mark, so usually I just kinda skip over Idols. They're a band that I just don't really care too much about. I do have to say though that I found Crawler to be enjoyable. Maybe that's due to the fact that this album seems to be a tiny bit more adventurous than the stuff I've heard them do previously. Don't quote me on that, I really haven't listened to everything Idols has done, so that's really not a objective analysis of it, but I don't know, I feel like they kind of step a bit out of their comfort zone on some things, and I think mostly it pays off. Sadly, that's about all I can say about this one. I'd put it right under Cavs. Madison is a jaw-droppingly gorgeous album that absolutely is one of the best of 2021. First off, it was recorded in a cave. That's just cool. I can only imagine the struggles of not only finding a cave, but making it sound good on a recording. And trust me, they make this cave sound absolutely amazing. Second off, all of the songs here are breathtaking. The songwriting is absolutely some of the best of this year. Jesus and Your Living Room Floor and Judy's Bedroom stick out to me as my two favorites. Oh, and The Constable. You can't forget The Constable. That one is a masterpiece. And on the same level as the songwriting here is just the compositions themselves. There's moments on here where I think to myself, this sounds like something Brian Wilson would have done on Pet Sounds or Smile. If you like that sort of creative orchestral ambition, this is probably right up your alley. I'll wrap up my brief synopsis of this album by saying Madison is excellent and it deserves way more attention than it's getting. Seriously, I've only come across like 10 reviews of this album, and like 5 of them are just random Rate Your Music reviews. I'd put this one directly under Dope Game Stupid. To end the recommended section is Godspeed You Black Emperor's God's P at State's End. I've loved every single thing I've heard from Godspeed, yet for some reason I never really did a full dive into their discography. I'm really not sure why that is, but after listening to Godspeed at State's End, I feel like it's an urgent matter. I feel like I have to do that. Like other Godspeed projects, this is dark and bleak, but also genuinely beautiful, and like other albums, the band just sounds huge. I wouldn't say that Godspeed is really out of their comfort zone on this one, but for what it is, it's really good. I think this one's really consistent. I can't really think of a moment where it feels wasted in any way. While I don't have much to say about this album, I really did like it, and I do think this is one of the best from 2021. Putting this on the list, it would probably go under LP. So yeah, that's basically everything I heard this year. Usually year-end recaps like this will end in some sort of cheesy emotional moment, but I'm not going to put you through that. Instead, I just want to talk about how much I enjoyed the music of this year. Whether we're talking about hip-hop or rock or whatever, it always seemed like there were some really important releases just around the corner. And not only were they notable, or at least to me they were notable, they were usually pretty good. Of course, I didn't like everything. I mean, this is a tier list after all. There are things at the bottom. But a lot of the time, if I liked something, I really liked it. I'm really glad that 2021 was the year I pushed myself to really start listening to new stuff. And while I probably could have pushed myself to listen to more, I am satisfied with what I ended up hearing. While I'm not sure what's going to happen in 2022 music-wise, I am excited for it. If it's anything like 2021, I think I'm really going to enjoy it. Thank you for watching through this very unofficial 2021 recap. I greatly appreciate it. Here's to a great music-filled 2022.